I'm Pastor Steve Talmage of Love of Christ Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. And each week, Pastor Nanette Christofferson or I try to provide a brief look at two of the assigned Bible readings for the upcoming Sunday. In this video, we're going to take a look at the Gospel for Sunday, October 8th, 2023. It's from Matthew 21, verses 33 to 46. We pick up right where we left off last Sunday with Jesus confronting or engaging the Pharisees, the scribes, the chief priests in the temple in Jerusalem. We're in Holy Week. And Jesus has shared the parable about two sons last week. And the Pharisees and religious leaders are beginning to realize he's talking about them not getting the witness of John the Baptist and his own witness as the one sent from God. And now we have another parable. So here it is, beginning in verse 33. Listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a watchtower. So I think it's critical that in that first sentence, what do you see, what do you read? First, there's an owner of this property, owner of this piece of land, who has made a major investment in this land by planting a vineyard. And as we know, vineyards take time for them to produce their crops. This landowner put protection around that property by providing a fence, put in a wine press so when the crops did come in, they could produce the wine. And it built a watchtower to keep an outlook for wild animals and potentially people coming to take advantage of the field. So this property, it's very clear, it belongs to somebody. We don't know who it is. But the people who are going to be put on the land do not own the land. It is not theirs. So then he leased it to tenants. So these are tenants. They've signed some sort of an agreement of how they're going to manage this property, and the owner went to another country. So he's an absentee landlord, which can sometimes cause problems, both good or bad. And he sent his slaves to the tenants. When the harvest time had come, he sent his slaves to the tenants to collect his produce. So, question I raise is, what has your experience been, either being or having tenants or being a tenant? And think about that. Think if you've rented property before, how you treated that property. Think if you were a landlord and you had tenants that you rented to, what your expectations of their behavior were. And granted, in this day and age, we have legal contracts with lawyers ready to pounce if we end up having problems in that agreement. But it's sometimes a delicate relationship. Sometimes it works wonderfully. Well, the question is this going to be a wonderful landlord-tenant relationship? Verses 35 to 37. But the tenant seized his slaves and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. So the agents of the landlord sends his servants, his slaves, to collect what is rightfully agreed to in their agreement. And the first one that's sent gets beat up, the second one gets killed, and another gets stoned. So that is probably not the response the landlord is looking for when it comes to pay what is rightfully his. Again, he sent other slaves. So he gives them another chance for them to pay up what they owe. More than the first. He sent other slaves more than the first, so more than 3. And they treated them in the same way. Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. So this landlord seeks to get what is rightfully his. He sends servants, he sends representatives, he sends his agents to collect what is rightfully his. And the people who are on the land, who are the tenants, violently reject paying the obligation that they have agreed to. So the landlord, rather than send an army, decides maybe if I send my son rather than servants or slaves, They'll respect him. So I asked the question, because this is all in reference to Jesus talking to Jewish religious leaders. In Israel's history, who are the ones sent first? And then, who is the Son? I think it's important as you frame this, it's coming out of Jewish history, out of Israel's history, and recognizing that God brought the people into the promised land. God raised up Moses to deliver the people from slavery in Egypt. God made a promise before that to Abraham and Sarah to create a nation. And God provided, and God delivered them into the promised land, raised up leaders, sent prophets to guide and direct them, gave them kings, and we saw what happened. We saw what happens in the 7th century with the Assyrians coming. Even before that, we saw the northern tribes break off from the southern tribes of Israel. So you had a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom after Solomon died. So the people of Israel weren't even united. We saw kings, most of them not doing what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And then in the 7th century, the Assyrians come and take the 10 tribes away, because they chased after idols and other things. And then in 586 BCE, the Babylonians come and destroy Jerusalem and haul off the people to Babylon. During that whole time period, God sent different agents, messengers, we call prophets, to guide and direct the people. But those in positions of power and authority, because we're not really dealing with the average Jane or Joe. It was the political and religious leadership in the nation of Israel that rejected the words of God's prophets. So God finally decides to do something unique. He sends his Son. All right, 38 to 39. But when the tenants saw the Son, they said to themselves, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and get his inheritance." What tenant thinks that by killing the heir to the property, they're going to be able to claim the property? Maybe they thought they had squatter rights, that they would just outlast the landlord. But in most cases, when the landlord is rejected in such a violent way, you're going to see a violent response in turn. You're going to see, in ancient Near East, an army comes with soldiers. In our day, you see the sheriff show up. So, they seized him, they threw the Son out of the vineyard, and they killed him. This is crazy thinking, that they can reject the agents of the landlord, and they can kill the son of the landlord and not think there are going to be consequences. So, continuing in verse 40, now when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? That's the big question. That's the drama in this little story Jesus is telling. I ask, if you were the owner, what would you do in light of everything you just read? What would you do? The religious leadership said to him, Jesus, "He will put those wretches to a miserable death and lease the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the harvest time." They understand the landlord has perfect right to claim what is rightfully his. And there are consequences for rebellious tenants, for disobedient tenants, for violent tenants. They get it. They fully understand this. Well, this is what Jesus says to them, 42 to 44. Have you never read the scriptures? These are the most learned people in Jesus' day. These are the folks who have copies and scrolls of the Jewish Bible, the Torah, and these are the ones that are in charge of interpreting and preaching and teaching to the people of Israel, the Jews. And he's saying, have you never read in the scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. Therefore, I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to people that produces the fruits of the kingdom. The one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls. Jesus lets them know clearly, just like in the earlier parable of the two sons, that the ones who knew the most actually failed to believe what the witness of the scriptures was, and that Jesus standing before them is the very cornerstone upon which God is fulfilling God's covenant to God's people, God's revealing God's truth of who God is as an agent of love, compassion, and mercy, a God who includes rather than excludes. And these folks are tripping on the cornerstone. Why don't the religious leaders initially see this story applying to them? What is it? What is it that causes them to be so blinded? For the ones who had the most to gain, they end up missing the whole point. And we hear in this verse, what is the purpose of the people of Israel? To be a blessing to the world, which translates to produce the fruits of the kingdom for the sake of not just Israel, not just for an elite group, but for all people, so that all might come to taste and experience and be nourished by the love, compassion, and mercy of God, clearly revealed in Jesus. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they realized that he was speaking about them. They wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowds because they regarded him as a prophet. They don't even see Jesus as a prophet. They see him as a threat. And they want to maintain peace for the sake of allowing Rome to continue to give them permission to carry out their religious duties and practices and to maintain the status quo. But they want to get rid of Jesus because Jesus is calling them on their stuff. That they have been given a responsibility, they have been given the resources, they've been given the role, and they have failed. They have failed to use the authority that's been entrusted to them to reveal who God really is. And that's a God of grace, mercy, love, compassion, forgiveness. And I underlined, or I bolded feared here, because how much does fear cripple us and paralyze us from accepting the truth of who God is in Jesus Christ? Because it might cost us something, and it might not be socially acceptable, or we might lose some status. Pray about this, read the lesson again, and God bless you as you prepare for worship this week.